Frieren remains a boring, tedious anime completely devoid of emotion. The author must be using ChatGPT to deliberately make his series as dull as possible. In the end, it's just a girl anime. I'm your classic man's man, at least according to other people. No stakes ever in this show. Look, you monkeys, if you want to What the hell? Okay, before you comment, actually, no. Pause the video, go make your comment, and come back. Okay, after you comment, I'm aware that Frieren is wildly popular both in Japan and the West, and at the time of recording holds the top 2 spots on my anime list, and therefore doesn't need defending by a little bastard like me. But this video isn't only about Frieren, and you can allow me a little clickbait. I'm literally making a YouTube video about boringness. I need all the algorithm help I can get. Regardless of how cherry-picked these reviews are, they do represent a real attitude that a lot of people have. And recently, with the show's return for a second season, there's been a new wave of backlash against Frieren, and the discourse has been dominated by a debate over whether it's dull, shallow, and one-note, filled with overly stoic character archetypes and devoid of tension, or if the detractors are just failing to grasp the depth of what's going on. For anyone unfamiliar, Frieren, Beyond Journey's End, is the story of a near-immortal elf, Frieren, who traveled with Himmel the hero and his legendary party of adventurers, saving the world from the Demon King back in the day. But that story has been over for years, and each member of the party has slowly grown old and died, except for Frieren, who has continued to roam the continent, collecting cool spells and doing odd jobs here and there. Now, after the death of the last other member of the party, she's acting as a mentor to 2 young apprentices of her former comrades, and learning how to relate to other people in the process. Even if I don't personally find it to be, I'm not here to argue that Frieren isn't boring, in part because that's an impossible thing to prove, but to argue that boringness itself is actually good. Or at least that it can be a virtue in the right context. And consequently, that you should spend your time watching YouTubers who speak incessantly in a slow, monotone voice about minute details of media. Boringness is impossible to pin down in terms of actual concrete qualities. If we defined it as that which bores someone, then every piece of media ever would have to be included, except for We Bought a Zoo starring Matthew Damon. So for the purpose of this video, I'm using it to mean basically what I think these people are getting at, and what I think comes to mind for most people. Slow pacing, relatively little overt tension or excitement, and a focus on the mundane. Unfortunately, in defense of media with slow pacing, relatively little overt tension or excitement, and a focus on the mundane isn't a very catchy title. Personally, I really like this show, but I do have my complaints about it, and I'll start by saying that I do think the detractors have a point about one-note characters, at least in reference to 2 pieces of the story so far. First, in the Mage Exam arc, where some of the competitors feel less like 3-dimensional characters and more like a flashcard with a cliched archetype on one side and a subversion of that cliche on the other. The cliches are arguably there on purpose, and some of the subversions are interesting, but it definitely gets tiring. And second, especially regarding the demons, an entire race of villains who, we're told multiple times, will try to trick you into empathizing with them or allowing them some humanity, but are actually just evil and inhuman by their very nature, and deserve no deeper thought as to their motivations, let alone empathy. Really, the world would be better off if every last one of them were eradicated. It's not great for nuanced storytelling, and even more not great for the worldview it lends credence to. But I think both of these issues are only symptoms of the central problem with Frieren that I mentioned in overly simplified terms at the end of my last video. It doesn't commit hard enough to being boring. This person calls it a poor man's battle shonen, but what it is caught between 2 genres. 1 part battle shonen, 2 parts contemplative, episodic exploration of the small, quiet moments that won't be recorded in epic tales of battle and heroism, but are nonetheless just as meaningful to Frieren and the people she shares them with. A battle shonen viewed from the outside, if not fully, at least adjacent to slice of life and iyashike, or healing type, a genre that's also kinda hard to define. Maybe there's another video in that. These epic battles and famous heroes do still need to be there to provide contrast and context for the world that Frieren chooses to live outside of, but when they seep too far into the main modern-day story, for me, those bits are when the magic starts to fade and the show starts to feel insecure, like the story itself is worried it's gonna bore you and needs to fit in some exciting action to keep your attention. I've been talking about the problems I have, but don't get it twisted, I do very much like this show. Those flashy battle scenes are always impeccably crafted with some of the greatest action animation money can buy, and a lot of the time that truly is enough to carry them, especially when these scenes appear in short bursts that average one per episode. But these are never the moments that stick with me the most, even in terms of animation. The crew over at Madhouse has been showing off right from episode 1, but the first moments of dazzling animation aren't some big battle, they're ordinary townsfolk enjoying a festival. These few cuts were done by the wickedly talented key animator Ayaka Tsuji, whose work often features naturalistic character acting and smooth motion. In this cut alone, there are, I think, 17 fully animated characters, all dancing in time with each other. 21 if you count the drummer behind these two, and these 3 people cheersing over here. I'd expect to see this level of effort put toward background characters in a feature film, but almost never in a TV anime. And it hardly lets up as the scene continues. This low-angle shot introduces Frieren into the scene from the perspective of a pack of wild children, and when she rejoins their comrades, even Aizen methodically breaking pieces off a loaf of bread in the background is rendered in extreme detail, because these little moments are what Frieren is all about. The first few scenes of Season 2 are fairly arbitrary. Fern and Stark forage for food while Frieren finds a cool rock in the bushes, but for me they're all about lighting and the feeling of a sunrise in the forest. Surrounded by these giant conifers, the painted background art is made up of these rich greens and blues, but a hint of pink is appearing in the sky reflected in the pools of water. The blue of the pre-dawn ambience infiltrates the characters and turns Stark's red hair and coat into a deep purple, and the soft yellow light of the sun shines in at a 90-degree angle as it starts to peek over the hills, warming their faces. Frieren powers up her cool rock, and the 3 emerge from the forest just as the sun starts to reach its full power, and the remaining purple shadows give center stage to the rays that gleam against rocks and bring a warm glow back to the grass. Later in the episode, we sit at the edge of a stream with the afternoon sun pouring through the gaps in the trees. Frieren watches Fern enjoy the simple pleasure of cleaning and taking care of things that are meaningful to her, and the sun glints off the bracelet given to her by Stark when she holds it up to admire it. So much of the magic of this show is in how fully realized its world feels and how well the characters fit into it, and the background art, color design, and direction are just as important as good animation. If we are going to talk about good animation though, one piece that has stuck with me more than any other is this scene that acts as the climax to episode 15. It's a perfect scene. The waltz in the background grows into the foreground as Stark and Fern step out to dance together. It starts a bit awkward and stiff. Fern's eyes shift nervously when they start moving. She glances down with a very subtle, nervous smile. Stark averts his gaze, but the two gradually gain confidence as the music swells and the other dancers enter the frame. Close-up shots of their hands and feet show them getting into the rhythm, and eventually each feels comfortable enough to look into each other's eyes. Some shots take interesting angles, like this one that revels in the beauty of Fern's dress, whirling and unfurling, or this one that uses distorted background art to let the camera pan realistically across the whole room with them, and others, like this one, frame the scene simply to let the elegance of the motion speak for itself. This sequence was animated by a Korean animator who goes by the name Jawn, whose anatomy and body movements are so precise and realistic that they sometimes start to look like they could plausibly be CGI, even when they're not. He also did these few cuts from Dungeon Meshi, which show some real range because they're notably stylized. Check out how it goes from slow to fast to slow as they hang in the air and back to fast when they land. That's in contrast to his work here and in many other places, which is extremely naturalistic with smooth motion and evenly spaced frames. Every piece of this scene is crafted with care. Composer Evan Call created the waltz specifically for the scene, and they even filmed the orchestra performing it to use as reference and make sure their movements are 100% accurate in this cut. Jawn also did a ton of work on, well, multiple musical instrument shows from 2022 actually, but most notably Bocchi the Rock, which had the same director as Frieren Season 1 and which did some very similar stuff with its shockingly accurate performances. Much of the in-between animation was done in-house, which is pretty unusual these days outside Kyoto Animation, and Jawn did his own second key animation. The dance itself was performed by real dancers and recorded for reference footage, and this is another one of those times where you might be fooled into thinking there's some sort of CGI element here with how perfectly the characters rotate in 3D space and the precision of the shadows, but you'd be wrong. The dancers did wear motion capture trackers, but apparently they ended up not even using the mocap data in the end. This guy is just a machine. The understanding of cloth physics and shape in the dress folding and twirling is unreal. I could watch this clip on repeat all day. It reminds me of this shot from Beauty and the Beast animated by James Baxter, who has a similarly machine-like eye for 3D shapes and movement, and hand drew these characters, fitting them perfectly into their CGI environment, except with 1990s technology. I wonder if this was even a direct inspiration. Finally, the youngsters twirl off to the left, bringing the simulated camera with them, which racks focus to the background for an elegant transition to Frieren and Jeanne at the edge of the room. A+ storyboarding from Izumi Seguchi. This entire sequence was one panel in the manga, but the crew went so hard with every little detail that in the show, it comes together into this transcendent experience, a worthy culmination of the time they spent in this city training and learning to dance. It's not relevant to the overarching plot, and nobody's life is in danger or anything, but I can't imagine watching this and not being completely entranced. It's not just Frieren. It's no wonder that during the age of the attention economy, as they call it, it feels like audiences are more sensitive to boredom and less able to tolerate it than ever before. Another recent example that comes to mind is Pluribus episode 7, The Gap. It's definitely a slow one and there's very little dialogue. Two similarly stubborn characters share a goal: to free humanity from the hive mind that has taken over all but a handful of the people on Earth. Manusos makes the long and arduous journey all the way up from Paraguay to meet with Carol, the only like-minded individual left on the planet. He refuses any help from the smiling hive mind and remains resolute even in the face of English learning tapes that insist on teaching him unnecessarily complex grammar.
To whom do the coats belong? To whom?
And the tree that gives you instant death if you touch it. Meanwhile, Carol is in the lap of luxury up here in Albuquerque. Anything she could ever want is provided to her, except any sort of companionship or human connection. The Joined had abandoned her on account of her being just unbearable to be around. The slow passage of time is central to this story, dragging on and testing the resolve and patience of both characters. By the end, Manusos is still unwavering, but Carol is worn down by the loneliness and finally begs for the hive mind to come back to her so that when the two finally meet, their goals won't be as aligned as they initially were. We're watching their paths slowly diverge. It's possible I'm biased because I happened to have just booked a stay at this exact same hot springs literal days before the episode came out, but for me this was one of the best episodes of the show. It's mostly quiet and meditative, and in true Vince Gilligan fashion, it shows you everything and tells you nothing. Not to mention the sheer vibes of Manusos' journey, but reactions online were mixed, with many people saying it was too slow, unwatchable, and that nothing happens in it. In a word, boring. So what does it actually mean for something, and media in particular, to be boring? Because it doesn't really describe an actual quality that you can point to, like most descriptors. I could say that this apple is green, or that the cinematography in this movie is impressionistic, or that this YouTube video is unnecessarily verbose. I could even say that the pacing in this show is slow, or that I'm bored by it, but that doesn't really mean the same thing, and it doesn't necessarily mean that someone else would also be bored by it. It's inherently a comparative statement. This thing is providing less stimulus, or a different type of stimulus, than I am seeking. We've all watched a movie, read a book, or played a game with slow pacing at some point in our lives and thoroughly enjoyed it, or sat through some big summer blockbuster that's barely 2 hours of back-to-back earth-shattering action scenes and set pieces, but just kept checking the time and waiting for the moment that we can finally go home and watch something that doesn't make us want to scoop our own brains out with a grapefruit spoon and fashion a nice meal out of it, like the montages from 2015 cult classic, according to me, CW dramedy iZombie. So again, what does it actually mean to be bored? You might think intuitively that boredom is a state of apathy where nothing is really going on in your head, and there's certainly a lack of stimulation, but boredom is actually a really powerful motivator, an anxious energy that drives your brain to search for something to give it some nice neuron activation. And as we'll see, that's a very important distinction, one that can make boring media just as engaging as a Mr. Beast video.
What's up, guys? I have 10,000 presents, I have an army of elves.
Professors of philosophy at the University University of Louisville, Andreas Elpidorou and John Gibson wrote a paper called Really Boring Art, and don't worry, I read it so you don't have to. They first synthesize existing research on boredom and come to a functional understanding of what boredom is, defining it by what it does and what it causes you to do. Quote, "Whatever the underlying trigger might be, boredom is an unstable emotion that seeks its own undoing, with the tension characteristic of it functioning as motivation to re-establish one's sense of connection to, broadly put, the meaningful and valuable." So if boredom is a motivator, then crucially, there's an opportunity for boring art to harness that motivation, at least with some cooperation from you. Because while the easiest course of action is to let your mind wander or leave the situation and seek a different source of stimulus altogether, it's also possible to take that energy and direct it right back into that boring thing and engage with it on a deeper level. Easier said than done, but in my experience, a dark movie theater can help nudge you in the right direction. Elpidorou and Gibson posit two different types of boring art, the episodically boring and the resolutely boring. Resolutely boring art, which they mainly focus on for this paper, is, well, really boring. The pure, unsullied platonic ideal of nothingness. No matter how hard you try, there is practically nothing for your mind to grab onto. They use Andy Warhol's Empire as an example, so let's watch it to get a sense for what they mean. You know what, actually, that might take too long. I think you get the point. This single shot of the Empire State Building was recorded for 6.5 hours at 24 frames per second and was actually projected in slight slow motion at 16 frames per second, making it last approximately 8 hours in total. No matter how hard you focus, there's basically nothing for your brain to latch onto for 8 hours straight. Maybe you could observe the way the lighting has changed over every hour or so, or think about what else is going on down below, but that's more like letting your mind wander than engaging with the actual film itself, and even then, there's no way those thoughts are going to last you 8 hours. On the other hand, episodically boring art, which is what we're mostly talking about today, is comparatively some wimpy shit. Sure, it's boring, but there's still something to grab onto. Typically, episodically boring works will either heighten your senses with periods of boredom, then punctuate them with moments that relieve the boredom and are enhanced by the contrast, or they'll require the viewer to enact that resolution for themselves by directing their attention to meaningful elements of the art that were there the whole time but may have been overlooked or drowned out by the expectation of a story or something that we would traditionally call exciting or interesting. So paradoxically, that boringness actually, ideally, causes you to be more engaged with the material, not less. There are different degrees to this, of course, but if Frieren is any type of boring, it's this one. This is all kind of theoretical, so to get a better sense of how it works, a personal account of my own experience with a slightly more extreme case. We'll come back to Frieren in a bit, but first, this is Jeanne Dielman,
23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles.
A Belgian film by Chantal Akerman from 1975, one of my favorite movies of all time, though not an easy one to rewatch, and the original reason I wanted to make this video. That's right, I'm two types of insufferable nerd at the same time. And you know what? This part feels weird to do as a freaky little half-animated, half-VTuber armadillo, so I think I'm actually gonna do it like this. I don't need these. I don't have any meat, so I'm doing an onion. I know at this point, any YouTuber worth his salt would have taken a tiny little lav mic and either held it or clipped it to the end of this knife, so as to project an air of charming incompetence and define myself as a quirky and authentic fool who cares not for the traditional standards of microphonesmanship. But I won't give you the satisfaction, because not only do I not own a lav mic, at what point does the air of authenticity fade when everybody on this godforsaken website and over on TikTok has been following this trend for over 5 years at this point, and it's now metastasized to the point that it's being used in a video like this one from a representative of AI music company Suno to launder their scheme to strip the music industry for parts as if it's just a scrappy tool to democratize the creation of art. I'll do you one better though. What I will do is precariously dangle the microphone from an elaborate pulley system I have attached to my ceiling so that I can feel like I'm presiding over a boxing match from before Al Gore invented Bluetooth.
I have not tried marijuana.
And to sweeten the deal, I'll gesticulate wildly with the knife, so as to put myself in maximum danger. This is my girl Jeanne Dielman, a mother, a widow, and a prostitute by day. The film opens on this shot of Jeanne Dielman's kitchen. She lights the stove and sets some potatoes to boil. She removes her smock and at the sound of the doorbell greets a man at the door. She leads him to the bedroom, then after a cut, the sun has gone down and the two re-emerge. The man hands her some money, says he'll see her next week, and leaves. She puts the money in a container on the dining table, drains the potatoes, scrubs herself thoroughly in the bathtub, cleans the bathtub, and sets the table just in time for her son Sylvan to return from school. During the movie's 3-hour and 20-minute runtime, we're shown shot after meticulously framed shot of Jeanne performing these precise, almost ritualistic routines over 3 days of her life. Cooking, cleaning, bathing, doing her hair and makeup, running errands, eating in near silence with her son. Everything she does is precise and proper and plays out in its entirety for you to watch nearly in real time. Jeanne Dielman is part of a trend called slow cinema, which originated in the 60s with people like Soviet filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky. It's a vague term with no real definition, but it generally forsakes traditional story and dramatization in favor of naturalism, with long takes, subdued performances, often from unprofessional actors. But above all, it has a focus on time itself. Film scholar Paul Schrader, no relation, wrote a book called Transcendent Style in Film in 1972. A couple years later, he would then also write the screenplay for a little movie called Taxi Driver. It's not relevant, but I thought it was interesting. Anyway, in a section on slow cinema, which he added to a later edition of the book, he wrote, Ozu, Bresson, Dreyer, Mizoguchi, De Sica, and the rest used film time to create an emotional or intellectual or spiritual effect. Tarkovsky used film techniques to study time. For Tarkovsky, time was not a means to a goal, it was the goal. I wouldn't say that time is the entire goal of Jeanne Dielman, but it's certainly the most important ingredient. I swear to you, I didn't say that this was one of my favorite movies earlier just to be pretentious and make myself look like a smarty. That's just an added bonus. I said it because, as far-fetched as it may sound, this is as engrossed in a movie as I have ever been. It's incredibly slow, but to say it's a movie where nothing happens wouldn't be accurate. Jeanne is incredibly busy and hardly ever has a moment to sit and think. Her every waking moment is filled with some task or chore which she performs with poise and a very faint smile on her face, as if by attending to these regimented habits she can keep everything under control. That is, until day 2 when the cracks start to show. Jeanne puts on a polite face while listening to a neighbor describe her day and closes the front door, but after she leaves the frame, it slowly swings back open a crack. She sits at the kitchen table eating a piece of bread and staring into space, the performance of a content housewife briefly missing, and the mask slips again at a coffee shop after she finishes her drink and doesn't have anything to occupy her hands. Just for a moment, then she conjures the polite smile again and gets up to go home. After her second client leaves, she apparently forgets to take the potatoes off the heat before taking a bath. So when she gets back to the kitchen, they're overcooked, and she has this minute where she doesn't know what to do before heading out to buy more potatoes so she can start over. From then on, the film starts to function basically like a horror movie. I won't spoil the ending in case you get to see it at some point, but things go basically the same, except that gradually things start to go wrong. Nothing major, but at this point you're so accustomed to her routine that even a missing button on her coat or... Oh my god. You know, I thought I would do this as a bit, cut an onion, make my eyes hurt, etc. It's not a bit anymore. I've been standing over this onion for such an unreasonable amount of time to cut an onion. I'm struggling. I'm okay, here we go. A missed button on her coat or a dropped spoon while drying silverware become an ill omen or a jump scare, and she starts to spend more time just sitting and staring. And it doesn't help that Sylvan just insists on saying some weird Freudian shit right before bed every single night.
Je lui avais dit quoi? Papa fait ça à maman? Et pendant des mois, j'ai détesté papa pour ça. Il est tard maintenant, j'éteins.
Your brain has recalibrated itself to match the situation and is able to read meaning into these small details that you might have completely overlooked in a less boring movie. I watched Jeanne Dielman for a class in college. Unfortunately, the professor wasn't able to sign out the theater for the entire length of the movie for some reason, so we had to finish the last bit of it next day in class. I sat in the front row for some extra leg room, and I remember being bored at first, but after an hour or so, I was locked into watching this lady wash some dishes. I was on the edge of my seat when she snapped back from a moment of disassociation and started really aggressively peeling some potatoes. That thing's sharp. She could hurt her. I'm just joking. Completely transfixed by the mesmerizing mixing of some meatloaf. Suddenly, I glanced up to see my then classmate, now girlfriend, looking down at me, slouched in my chair, staring up at the screen. She was telling me that it was time to go. I turned around and noticed that somehow everybody else had already left the theater. To this day, I have no idea how everybody knew exactly when it was time to go. The movie was still playing. She told me as we were leaving that she thought I had fallen asleep, but no, I had just been sucked into Jeanne Dielman's dimension. That's why this is one of my favorite movies. To be clear, I'm not trying to boast about my attention span or my ability to focus or anything like that. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Just trying to finish this script has been like trying to force cottage cheese through a silly straw, and I'm probably watching a video about dishwashers or city planning or something while I'm editing it. This is just the effect that the movie had on me. To the extent that there is a plot, very few of these scenes technically do anything at all to advance it. Really, this entire story could have been told in a 20-minute short, but if you remove or shorten these scenes, it becomes a worse movie. Okay, at this point it would be a second-degree felony not to mention that there's some gender up in this bastard. It's not a coincidence that all three of the pieces that I've brought up so far have had female protagonists. Well, maybe you could argue it's a coincidence for Pluribus, but the Venn diagram of that which is considered mundane or boring and that which is traditionally coded as feminine, according to patriarchy, is pretty close to being a circle. Though Chantal Akerman has avoided the label herself, Jeanne Dielman has been widely lauded as a landmark in feminist cinema and is clearly deeply rooted in a female perspective. The character was inspired by her mother and a generation of women who endured a status quo that Akerman herself was able to escape. For Jeanne, deeply repressed and struggling to hold together a respectable middle-class life despite the death of a husband that she admittedly only married because it seemed like it was what she was supposed to do, normative society and patriarchy in particular turn her home into a cage, but also her entire identity. Even when she does rebel slightly, it's in a way that's barely perceptible, like this moment where she compulsively straightens the table while waiting for the vegetables to cook, then nudges the salt and pepper shaker tray off kilter and stares at it as she quickly walks to the kitchen. The title of the movie is her name followed by her address because her address might as well be part of her name. But the film also simultaneously questions the idea that the domestic and the mundane, those things that we, and even more so they in the 20th century considered to be feminine, can't also be thrilling and the subject of a feature film. As Akerman said in an interview right after the film's debut, the important thing is the style, the form. It shows everybody has conditioning. The attention I show to this woman's gestures is very positive, to show that someone doing the dishes can also be used for art. That is positive. I assume that's translated. It might not be the most exact translation, but you get the idea. Anyway, if you're lucky enough, like I am, to have a weird little independent movie theater near you and they happen to be showing this movie, I highly recommend it. And a dark theater might be the only place where the boringness of it is really able to lock into your brain and take you for a ride. On a lighter note, and transitioning back towards Frieren, movies from Studio Ghibli have often framed the mundane and so-called women's work as worthy of being treated as spectacle in and of itself. Hey, give me money! If you like this video, consider taking a look at my Patreon page, where you can get some extra behind-the-scenes stuff, access to videos early if you go for tier 2 or above, a bunch of other stuff. And it helps me be able to spend more time on bigger videos like these. Okay, thank you. Back to it. There's plenty of war and action animation involved in most Ghibli movies, and yet what do people generally think of first when the name is mentioned? Pastoral landscapes and delicious-looking food animation, usually. In her paper, The Spectacular Mundane in the Films of Studio Ghibli for the Journal of Anime and Manga Studies, Zoe Crombie brings up the concept of defamiliarization in relation to animation. Things that we see and experience routinely eventually become familiar and mundane. In animation, familiar images like an egg frying in a pan can be abstracted and stylized into an image that defamiliarizes the egg and lets us experience the beauty of it as if seeing it for the first time. It turns it into a spectacle of its own. Miyazaki's male badasses often eschew traditional gender roles in ways that surprise the characters around them. In Princess Mononoke, Prince Ashitaka joins the women of Irontown, pumping the bellows, and in Howl's Moving Castle, housework plays a central role, even more so than the war that's going on in the background. After being transformed into an old lady, Sophie adapts to the role almost immediately. Being an elderly woman isn't portrayed as a tragedy to be fixed, really. Sure, she's shocked and confused and does initially want to break the curse, but it quickly becomes clear that as an old lady, she's no less capable of saving the day.
One nice thing about getting old is nothing frightens you.
Upon entering the castle, she starts cooking and cleaning, assuming the work will be left to her.
Looks like I've got my work cut out for me.
But when Howl gets home, a surprisingly androgynous figure, exhausted from battle, to her surprise, he takes the pan from her hand and takes over cooking breakfast. The domestic work brings a smile to his face and seems to rejuvenate him a little. Crombie writes, Howl's willingness to undertake this typically feminized domestic labor, as well as his natural talent at doing so, removes the stigma of performing labor beyond the confines of your gender. The state of the castle, which is really more of a cottage on the inside, seems directly linked to Howl's well-being, and to keep the thing moving, he must continuously tend to Calcifer, the kitchen flame at its center. Even Calcifer, who outwardly complains about being confined to this life, clearly takes pride in doing a good job of running the house as well.
I am thoroughly impressed.
And when the castle soars triumphantly through the sky at the end, laundry hangs out to dry, flapping in the wind in place of a flag. A movie like Howl's Moving Castle is far from slow cinema, and I don't think many people would consider it boring exactly, but it's firmly focused on the mundane in a way that lets us experience it as spectacular. Howl and Jeanne Dielman treat housework very differently, but it's important to both films. So the best works of boring and mundane media are about time itself and recontextualize domestic labor as meaningful in and of itself. Now that we have that context, back to the elf show. Not that one. Frieren combines a mild version of episodic boringness and the spectacular mundane to tell a story about the meaning that can be found in living a slow, simple life in the wake of epic adventures and battles. In terms of gender roles, admittedly, it doesn't handle them with nearly the thoughtfulness or nuance of Ackerman or Miyazaki. Gender essentialism seems deeply baked into the shows and Frieren's own understanding of the world, but at the same time, it does have the same reverence for the mundane and the girly. Frieren's strength doesn't come from her desire or drive to be the best or the strongest or even to save the world. It comes from her hobby of collecting spells that she personally finds cool.
変な魔法ばかり集めていますね。趣味だからね。
The few elves that we see are often pretty bored and disconnected from the world around them, killing time with stuff like the longest term prank setup of all time for Milliard. Frieren was like that too until she met Himmel and became the final boss of enjoying the simple pleasures in life, collecting spells not as a means to an end, but just for their own sake. A spell to turn sweet grapes into sour ones. A spell to get rid of mold. In episode 2, to Fern's dismay, she and Frieren spend 6 months searching for a particular flower on a whim because it used to grow in Himmel's homeland, and Frieren wants to make a spell to conjure a field of them around one of his statues. Himmel's interest in her spells had prompted her to follow her passion in collecting them, and through that passion she's been able to connect more deeply with the world and the people around her. After Himmel died, she regretted not having spent more time getting to know him because a human life passes in the blink of an eye for an elf, but she did remember the name of this flower he once mentioned to her. When she does find the flower, we get this divinely detailed cut from Aoi Otani, where you can see the translucence of the petals as the shadow of her hand passes through them. When Fern gets a fever in episode 17, Frieren shows that she's continued collecting these little pieces of information about people the same way she collects her spells.
フェルンは風邪をひいた時、 手を握ってあげると安心するんだよ。
And when she and Stark go searching for ingredients to cure Fern, these two shots echo that same montage with Fern looking for the flowers in episode 2. Finally, by the end of the season, Fern has learned from Frieren and asks for a legendary spell to make clothes clean and spotless as her ultimate reward for becoming a first-class mage. Maybe if Jeanne Dielman had had spells like these, she wouldn't have had such a rough time of it. And of course, Frieren is also about time, even if it's in a pretty different way from the classics of slow cinema. This person writes that they found the first few episodes in particular incredibly boring, which hurts my head to think about because for me the first few episodes were phenomenal. While I've been talking about Frieren's slow pacing, you might have been screaming at the screen that actually, in a literal sense, time moves very quickly in this show. Being nearly immortal, Frieren perceives time as moving way faster than everyone else, and particularly at the start of the series, the show lets you feel that passage of time the same way she does, paradoxically fast and slow at the same time. Years will pass with no warning in between cuts, and Fern grows taller than Frieren before you've even noticed that it's happening. In later episodes, the characters will come to a new location and have a whole mini-arc in one episode or even half an episode and move on. Then the next moment, we're just basking in a peaceful, quiet moment.
すごく穏やかな時間ですね。
Or in one of these beautiful travel montages that give a unique sense of place to every area the characters pass through and make me wish there was a map of this world with like Tolkien-level detail, while also conveying this bittersweet, wistful feeling of time passing by. Give me all that whist. I love it.
Not everyone is interested in your whist.
But I am. For Frieren, and anyone over the age of 20, time slips away all too quickly, but that's all the more reason to take it day by day and bear witness to each second. I think there's a disconnect where some people say that this show is supposed to feel like normal everyday life, and then others rightfully point out that there are actually a ton of high-octane battle scenes. This is what your everyday life looks like? But as incredible as these scenes are, they're usually not the ones that stick with me. The ones that do are simple moments like the dance scene I broke down earlier, or the puppet show from the second episode of season 2, which I broke down in another video. They don't contain overt tension or move the overarching plot forward much at all, but they do impart meaning about the world and its history, or about the characters and their emotions. And when the people creating the show go above and beyond to bring these moments to life with the same respect and attention to detail that in many shows would be reserved exclusively for the action scenes, that's when Frieren is at its best, and that's what leaves an impression on me. I really don't mind that Frieren has a flat affect and looks bored most of the time. Those are two characteristics that also describe me in my daily life, and by meeting her and the show at its own level, we can see in the smaller details that she's actually not bored. She might be unmoved by the machinations of demons and the rise and fall of great cities because she's been observing them for centuries, but that doesn't mean that she's not deeply affected by her relationships to her companions or doesn't find meaning through her quest to collect rare but mundane spells. Stuck in a world that's profoundly boring to people like her, she's chosen, instead of disconnecting from it, to redirect her attention back into the finer details and find the value that was there all along, but she would have missed by blazing through the centuries waiting for the next exciting thing to happen. And you can learn from her example and do the same thing with boring media. I do unfortunately get the impression that it's only a matter of time before the show gives into the pressure of plot development and increasing stakes and gradually gets swallowed up by the battle shonen it initially claimed not to be. I'd love to be proven wrong on that, but if I'm not, maybe that's okay and I'll just have to let it go at some point, in the spirit of Frieren herself. Everything is fleeting, after all. I think in this moment on Earth, boring media is exactly what we need. Slow cinema is still going strong today. In fact, we're arguably in the golden age of the style, with more widespread recognition than ever for movies that are arguably slow cinema, like Nomadland, Drive My Car, or Roma, to name a few recent Oscar winners. That heightened popularity can be viewed as a reaction to the age of the attention economy. If everything around you is screaming at you, begging to capitalize on your attention, taking the time to sit and enjoy something relatively less attention-grabbing becomes an act of rebellion. I'm not here to lament a crisis of short attention spans, or to tell you to do a dopamine detox or any other pseudoscientific hogwash to make you 30 times more productive for your shareholders, but your brain does work like a muscle. When it gets constantly blasted with distraction and stuff that's so dizzyingly stimulating that you couldn't look away even if you wanted to, the part that's supposed to be able to consciously absorb and interpret information atrophies. Like I mentioned, I'm not trying to put myself above anyone else or or anything like that. My brain is absolutely cooked, dog. But I have noticed that when I take some time to slow down and reduce the stimulus, whether it's consuming some boring media or just taking a walk in my neighborhood and watching the birds do their bird stuff, I usually feel like I've gotten a temporary brain power-up, like I'm better able to think deeply and direct my focus than I was before, at least for a little while. It's not that I want to watch something slow and quiet to give my feeble brain a cozy little break. It's actually quite the opposite. That f***er's begging me for a workout. If you find Frieren or Jeanne Dielman or anything else boring in the sense that you're personally just not interested in the subject matter or themes, then fair play. That's basically the same thing as just saying you're not interested in it. Maybe try coming back to it at a different time in your life when the types of media that resonate with you has changed, or don't. There's obviously no obligation to consume something that doesn't interest you. But if the claim is that it's boring in the sense that it fundamentally isn't providing enough interest, excitement, etc., the characters are too stoic, there's not enough tension in interactions, or it's just a bunch of cooking and cleaning, and therefore it's fundamentally boring and not worthy of your attention, I would urge you to try meeting that thing where it is, coming to it without any expectations of what it should be, and doing your best to engage with it on its own level without escaping to the first distraction that presents itself. That might require you to sit and be bored for a while your brain recalibrates to a different baseline, and certainly a dark movie theater makes that way easier to do than it would be in your living room, but you might be surprised by where a piece of boring media can take you if you let it. I guess what I'm trying to say is please go to the cinema and watch some boring, pretentious art films. Join us. Thank you for watching, and thank you so much to everyone who supports me over on Patreon by mailing me a few crumpled up dollar bills every month to help me make videos like this, such as Macintosh, Scorpiante, Katie L, Serial L, Leia Pico, Nutaf, Patrick Davison, Arborix, Jun, Dr. Yolo McSwag, Grav G, Joe, Fuggin Annie, Sammy Z, Nozomi Corgi, Machu Stepek, Juicebox, Bloodsbane, Orwing, and Chris Ushi, as well as all the other names you're seeing on the screen right now.